You have to hear what an NBA assistant coach told me about DeMar DeRozan, what he brings to the already lethal Sacramento Kings offense, and even a controversial comparison to the 2002 Sacramento Kings. I'll share it all with you right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. And a couple of weeks ago, very soon after DeMar DeRozan to the Sacramento Kings became official, I had a private conversation with an NBA assistant coach about DeMar DeRozan. Now, it wasn't an interview, and it was kind of an off-the-record conversation, so I'm not going to share anything about who I spoke to keep that private. However, I will share with you and have been given the okay to share with you what this coach had to say about DeRozan and what he is bringing with him to Sacramento. If you weren't already beyond excited for DeRozan to be a King, I think you are going to be like me, losing our minds at how long we still have to go between now and the start of next season. You're going to be buzzing about DeMar DeRozan even more, hopefully after hearing what this assistant coach had to tell me. Essentially, we're diving headfirst into it. What he told me is that DeMar DeRozan addresses the biggest and really only weakness of the Sacramento Kings offense. And I'm not talking about the Kings offense from last season that took a step back as they tried to figure things out and focus more on the defensive end. I'm talking about addressing the real only weakness of the Sacramento Kings offense from the 2022-2023 season when the Kings ended the playoff drought and at the time had the best offense with the highest offensive rating in NBA history. That team had one weakness, and DeMar DeRozan addresses that. That weakness is this. The Kings offense still is, and was at the time, completely reliant upon their offensive sets, right? I'm talking about the dribble handoffs, the pace and space, getting out in transition, looking for open threes, push five offense, a lot of play in the high post. These are all terms that are used to describe the actions and the foundation of how the Sacramento Kings play on the offensive end. When they first debuted it in Mike Brown's inaugural season with the Kings, when he was voted the first ever unanimous coach of the year, when teams were confused as to how to stop it, struggling to stop it, Kevin Durant was going on his podcast and saying you can't do anything to stop the Sacramento Kings. It was because this was new, and the way that they were playing, teams had not yet figured it out. But as that season went on, and as we got to the later part of the season, and really once we got into the playoffs in the best of seven series against the Golden State Warriors, at that point, with the allowance of more physicality on the defensive end by officials and teams getting a little more time. Remember, the Golden State Warriors played the Kings 4 times during the regular season before they met and played 7 times in the playoffs, right? So teams started to figure out the Sacramento Kings a little bit more. And essentially what they tried to do, what they emphasized doing, was slowing down or taking away the Kings' actions that they want to run. Now, one of them is pretty straightforward. Limiting the Sacramento Kings in transition, right? Trying to slow them down. So getting back in transition, that's pretty straightforward. But specifically in the half court, when the Kings were trying to run their sets, which typically you saw a lot of the high post with Domantas Sabonis, the dribble handoffs. What did we see? We saw the Golden State Warriors and other teams start to be physical and take away the ball handler or the player that was trying to get the open shot off of the curl or off of the handoff. We saw the Golden State Warriors really pressing Kevin Huerter, who had a lot of success doing that, closing out and hovering around or smothering Keegan Murray on the perimeter, while backing off of Domantas Sabonis and essentially forcing the Kings into situations where they needed to rely on isolation scoring, whether it was late in the shot clock or, hey, Domas, just take the shot. We'll give you the mid-range shot. Beat us on your own. You're not going to beat us with your teammates. You're not going to beat us with your actions. Go out and beat us on your own. Show us that you can do it. And the Sacramento Kings really struggled with that in the playoffs, and they struggled with it a lot last season. The reason why is they only really had one guy, maybe two. You can maybe make an argument for Malik Monk and how he emerged as another kind of isolation go-to scorer at times for the Sacramento Kings, but not on the level that the Kings needed, and certainly not on the level of De'Aaron Fox. When the Kings would have their actions taken away and be forced into situations where they needed to score in isolation or needed to score late in the shot clock, De'Aaron Fox was the guy that Sacramento turned to. Now, they had a lot of success 2 seasons ago because De'Aaron Fox was one of the best mid-range scorers in the league, one clutch player of the year. Last season, we saw Fox try and emphasize his three-point game a little more, become more of a 3-level scorer, and he had zero help, with the exception of a little bit from Malik Monk, zero help from other isolation scorers that could go out and get a bucket when the Kings' offensive sets would break down. So now, you've not just added another quality isolation scorer. You have added in DeMar DeRozan one of the best, period, the best isolation mid-range scorers in the NBA. And here's the thing about DeRozan. This is what this coach told me. DeRozan doesn't need a lot of time, and he doesn't need a lot of space to beat you. Let's break that down a little bit further. Time-wise, like I said, whether it's in a clutch situation, DeMar DeRozan was second in clutch player of the year to De'Aaron Fox 2 seasons ago. DeMar DeRozan actually, over the last 2 seasons, has more clutch points than De'Aaron Fox. They're 1 and 2 in the league right now. So when it comes to fourth quarter scoring and the end of the game, like, you added one of the best that there is in those scenarios. But it goes beyond that, because you don't just want to add a guy who's hopefully going to be great in the fourth quarter and nothing else. When you're late in the shot clock, right? When your offensive sets have broken down, teams have taken something away, and now there's 7-8 seconds left on the shot clock. Hey, give the ball to DeRozan on the wing, give him the ball to him on the block, or give it to him on the elbow. Let him go to work, right? And that's where he can get you a bucket, a timely bucket when you need it too. So that's the time. But the space is another important aspect to this. Go and watch film of DeMar DeRozan's mid-range scoring, and you don't have to go far back. Look at some of his best plays from last season with the Chicago Bulls, right? What I want you to pay attention to, and this is what the coach pointed out to me, look how many times he is smothered by a defender and there is a help defender nearby, and he still is able to score, hit the tough shot, and get to the spots that he likes in that mid-range. Look how many times it happens. He thrives in those situations. So yes, by adding DeMar DeRozan and in theory putting him out there with Fox and Sabonis, you're taking away some of your spacing with the three-point shooting. However, I don't believe DeMar DeRozan is as bad of a three-point shooter as people make him out to be. I know that is not the go-to part of his game, but the Kings aren't necessarily looking for that from him. They're looking for exactly what we're talking about, more of like an isolation, mid-range, go and get me a bucket type scorer, which is who DeRozan is. But now, even if Kevin Huerter's not out there with him, or Keegan Murray's not out there with him, he can get away with a little less space still by having success scoring in the mid-range, which is what he does. The Kings now have 2 elite scorers that can get them a bucket at any time, whether it's late in the game, late in the shot clock, or when the Kings are on the wrong end of a run and need to stop the bleeding. They have 2 of the best guys in the league that are capable of doing that, who are also able to share the floor together. Coach talked a lot about ball dominance, right? Can De'Aaron Fox and DeMar DeRozan coexist to be the best? They both need to have the ball in their hands. They can continue to play off of one another. And here's what DeMar DeRozan also brings. If De'Aaron Fox wants to emphasize that three-point game, which is the volume increase and his desire to take that shot, we saw that a lot more last season. He has confidence in that shot. De'Aaron wants to take that shot more. The Kings last season at times couldn't afford to just have De'Aaron take and miss those shots because, again, he was really the only guy that could go out and get them a bucket when they needed it. De'Aaron went a little more away from the mid-range game, and Sacramento suffered for it a little bit. Now, De'Aaron emphasizing the three-point shot also kind of keeps him out of trouble and getting banged up and getting hit around the rim, which is important for getting through an 82-game season and hopefully a deep playoff run. DeMar DeRozan takes some of that responsibility off of the shoulders of De'Aaron Fox, allows him to be more of that shooter, to take on more of that floor spacing responsibility while DeRozan has the ball in his hands. And also, DeRozan is a really, really good passer in the mid-range. When trying to create, you see a second defender or a third defender come up. He's really good at the dump-off passes to the big man who's free on the block. He's really good at finding the guy in the corner or guy on the wing that's going to be open, and that space is almost reversely created to give opportunity on the perimeter because of the amount of attention that DeMar DeRozan brings out. On top of that, DeMar DeRozan is more than capable of playing in the DHO game as well. He's not going to be someone that is going to be running off of a curl and taking a three like we see Kevin Huerter or Keegan Murray doing necessarily, but you can run DeMar DeRozan off of and around Domantas Sabonis at any time too, to give him just a little bit of space he needs to hit a quick pull-up jumper and get the Kings 2 points whenever they're needing that. And he is not a bad option as a bailout, of course. Like if things are not going well, go to DeRozan, get him that shot. You can even put DeMar DeRozan in the corner where he shot 39% from corner threes last season with the Chicago Bulls, which is really, really good. Here's what the coach told me verbatim. The Kings will be near unstoppable offensively. There are no exploitable weaknesses. I'll say that one more time. This is what the NBA assistant coach told me. The Kings will be near unstoppable offensively. There are no exploitable weaknesses. That's what DeMar DeRozan brings to this Kings team. But we had more than just the offensive conversation. We talked about DeMar DeRozan's defense, and this coach brought up a pretty controversial comparison to the 2002 Sacramento Kings that I want to share with you because I think you're going to have some thoughts on what he had to say about that. That's all still coming here on the show. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, today's Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Game Time. If you're looking forward to buying tickets to come and see DeMar DeRozan play in Sacramento in person, or maybe if you're out of town and the Kings are on the road playing near you, buy your tickets on Game Time. And here's a tip. Wait till the last minute. Yeah, that usually is not a good piece of advice to give in anything, but Game Time rewards you for buying tickets closer to the event. They have deals where you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sporting events, for concerts, for comedy shows, theatrical productions, whatever the case may be. Game Time has it. They have incredible flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive deals on select games and select events. They have their all-in pricing feature that shows you exactly what you're going to be paying. So there's no hidden fees on top of that. You're not going to be bombarded with another $20 to $30 in fees at checkout that makes your reasonable tickets now feel a little more unreasonable. You have amazing seat views, so you know exactly what you are going to see from your seat. It's the most accurate that you will find out there. Plus, they have the lowest price guarantee on Game Time. They'll credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in or around the same area for a cheaper price. It's all that Game Time guarantee. Take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So in my conversation with this assistant coach, we got to talking about DeMar on the defensive end. Now, he was honest, and he said, look, DeMar DeRozan is never going to be known as a great defender. He's never going to be. That is, if there is a weakness of DeMar DeRozan's game, it is on the defensive end. And you have to imagine at him 34, soon to be 35 years old, defensively, he's not going to be someone that is suddenly going to revitalize his career on that end of the floor, right? What he is defensively is what you get. But what this coach continued to emphasize is that the defensive limitations by no means outweigh the offensive input that he's going to bring to this Kings team. What he said was that DeRozan has taken a bulk of defensive blame for the bad teams that he's been on as of late, whether it was in Chicago, at times in San Antonio. DeMar DeRozan being one of the stars, if not the star, in the face of that team. A lot of the defensive blame unfairly fell upon him when it didn't deserve to be. Now, he wasn't necessarily doing anything defensively that set him apart from everybody else, right? But if you were to do a basic Google search about and look up DeMar DeRozan defense, right, you're going to see a lot of articles and see a lot of videos of breakdowns or mistakes and struggles that DeMar DeRozan has had. But what this coach is telling me is that he didn't describe DeRozan as an underrated defender necessarily, but he said DeRozan has taken more of the criticism than is due. He gets deflections. He understands his role on the defensive end. He's going to buy into the team defensive system or the team defensive expectations that Mike Brown is going to lay out. And here's the big one too. DeMar DeRozan will not be abused if he is isolated or targeted by opposing teams. This is something that, not to pick on the guy, but this is something that we see with Kevin Huerter a lot, right? Whoever Kevin Huerter is guarding, teams try and single that out. Teams try and go right at that. And they've had a lot of success over the last couple seasons, especially last year, right? They had a lot of success of targeting, isolating Kevin Huerter, and going after him. Now, the Kings, being a roster that is not necessarily stacked with defensive players, right? Malik Monk has been isolated defensively before. The Kings have a system that is switching, like heavy switching, which means to kind of break it down. Let's say I am the point guard guarding the opposing team's point guard. The center comes up and sets a screen to try and create separation for the point guard. I then switch onto the center and my big man now steps out, or whoever is guarding the ball screener now steps out, and they take the responsibility of defending the ball carrier in that sense. Switching, it's high movement, it requires a lot of communication. That is the defensive system that the Kings have, switching and helping. That is the way the Kings have played a defense for the last 2 years. They've just tried to add more of a physical element to it. So when you switch, you bump guys. When you help, you use your body, not your arms, to take away passing lanes, take away like room or lanes to the rim, right? Make guys feel you. That's been the big thing that Mike Brown has tried to add on to his defensive philosophy over the last season. DeMar DeRozan is capable of doing that. In that kind of system, DeRozan can succeed. He's not guaranteed to succeed, and he's not going to be the best one. But the coach says in that kind of system, he can succeed because he's smart enough and strong enough and athletic enough still to know how to do that and how to carry that out. Again, he's never going to be more of a liability on the defensive end than he is a boon or a positive on the offensive end, right? There are going to be games, there's going to be anomaly games out there where DeRozan's having a bad night offensively, defensively he's struggling as well, and he's overall net negative. That's not going to happen very often. It's not. So defensively, there are concerns about DeMar DeRozan. There are valid criticisms, just like there are valid concerns and criticisms about the Sacramento Kings defense, period. Right? I had a conversation with Damian Barling and Kenny Caraway, D'Lo and KC on ESPN 1320, and we talked about the defense and the fact that De'Aaron Fox and Mike Brown and others have brought up the officiating with how the Kings played defense at the end of last season, how officials in the final third of the season backed off a little bit and allowed for more physical play. The fact that these guys are pointing that out suggests to me that the officials have a lot of power for how the Kings defense is going to play next season. To start next season, are officials still lenient, or do they go back to blowing the whistle for every little ticky-tack foul and bailing out the offense every opportunity? If that's the case, then defensively, I guess we should expect the Sacramento Kings to struggle. It's a variable that you can't control, right? And you want to take those out of play as much as possible. I'm sure Mike Brown and the Kings this in training camp and this offseason and in practices are going to emphasize controlling what you can control and playing the same way defensively no matter how officials are calling a game. DeMar DeRozan, just like everybody else, is going to be expected to kind of fit into that. But officials have a lot of power. And if the Kings aren't able to play with the physicality throughout the season that they were able to play with at the end of last season when we started seeing all that defensive success, yeah, there are some valid concerns about this Kings defense still going forward. That being said, like what we've talked about in the last segment, the offensive boon and the boosts that DeMar DeRozan brings suggests that the Sacramento Kings can be even better and more dangerous offensively than they were 2 seasons ago. And now how teams know to beat or believe or game plan to beat the Sacramento offense, now that doesn't work as well anymore because you've added a 6-time All-Star that directly counters that. I promised you I'd share with you the controversial thing that this coach had to say, a controversial comparison between this Kings core and the 2002 Sacramento Kings core. I'll have that for you next. So I'll preface this by saying, I don't know if I 100% buy into what I'm about to share with you. I don't know if I'm on board, but it was fun to think about, fun to talk about with this coach. And I knew, okay, if I were to talk about this on the podcast, I knew it would get response. I knew it would get your thoughts and for you to weigh in on the matter. If you want to weigh in, please do so at MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. You can leave your comments in the comment section down below, of course, if you're watching on YouTube. But here's what the coach said. He said he would put the new core 5 in Sacramento, which is Fox, Monk, DeRozan, Murray, and Sabonis. That should be their closing 5. I also think that should be their starting 5, but that's a conversation for another day. He would put that core 5 against the core 5 of the 2002 Kings with confidence. We're talking Bibby, Christie, Peja, Weber, and Vlade. Whew. On the surface, you're thinking that was a team that won 60-plus games. That was a team that was the best team in the NBA by far. We know what happened against the Los Angeles Lakers in the playoffs. We don't need to go back into that old wound. But that team was the greatest show on court, right? One of the best teams of all time. And this coach says that lineup for lineup, straight up, these core 5 in Sacramento, that he'd feel confident putting the 5 of them up against that 2002 lineup and thinks that they would have success. So we dove into that a little bit more. I'll just kind of run through this and rattle this quickly. He says that potential 5 has the chance to be the best, most talented 5-man lineup in the history of the Sacramento Kings. I understand that potential for sure. He said Fox and DeRozan take on the star or offensive scoring output that C-Webb brought the Kings. Now, both of those guys aren't nearly as big or as physical as Chris Webber is. So that comparison's a loose comparison. We're talking about one of the most dominant power forwards ever versus a point guard and a wing. So understand that comparison with a grain of salt, but essentially what C-Webb was offensively for that Kings team, Fox and DeRozan combined more than make up for that. In fact, they exceed that. But we're talking 2 players to 1, right? He also said that Malik Monk has a combination of the best of Bibby and Williams. J-Will, white chocolate, to some extent. He's got Bibby's scoring ability, maybe not the big shot ability that Mike was famous for here in Sacramento. We still have to see more of that from Malik. But he's got that Bibby scoring ability with J-Will's playmaking and flash and flare and passing. Now, J-Will was more of a flashy passer than Malik Monk is, but Malik's got some of that. He's got some of that flair, that swag to his game, right? So this coach thinks he's got a good combination of that. He says Domantas Sabonis is a much more skilled version of Vlade Divac. I 100% agree with that. Domantas Sabonis is a better player than Vlade Divac was pretty much across the board. Now, Vlade was the absolute glue and heartbeat of that team, and we know how great of a passer Vlade was, but I'd put Domas's passing right up there and probably say it's better than Vlade's, just in my opinion. He says Keegan Murray is capable of the Peja Stojakovic spacing and shooting role. Now, Peja was a 20 points per game shooter. Keegan hasn't shown that ability yet, but Peja was a perimeter merchant, right? And we know Keegan is capable of being that too. Sacramento is still wanting to see a little more shot creation from Keegan, but Keegan is already a better defender than Peja Stojakovic was. So he thinks that if Keegan can continue to develop offensively, he can be a better version of Peja Stojakovic for this Kings team. Really, and this is my argument coming into play here, the only thing missing is the lockdown defense of Doug Christie. Now, that's a big thing missing because maybe Keegan can kind of be that, and De'Aaron at times can kind of be that, but the Kings don't have that Doug Christie, I'm going to make it my mission to guard the opposing team's best player and make their life as difficult as possible. Maybe Devin Carter could be that. I'm not expecting that from a rookie right away. Hopefully he can turn into that. Maybe Keon Ellis can be that. Again, we're talking to a guy that was just a two-way player. So it was a fun comparison with the coach. It made me excited. It was fun to talk about. I don't know if I'm not there yet, right? Come on, it's the 2002 Sacramento Kings. That team is goated. So, but if this roster has a chance to be better or just as good as that team, or these core five have just a chance to be as good or better than that core five, you're right. The Kings are in a pretty good spot. Now, I'm certainly not picking the Kings to win 60 games next season, but if it happens, I'm certainly not going to complain about it, right? This conversation with this coach just made me so excited about DeMar DeRozan. Again, now I want to hear from you. Your thoughts on the 2002 comparison, your thoughts on what he brings offensively, your thoughts on DeRozan's defense. I would love to, and I'm working on it, to have this coach on as I don't know if he'll ever be game for it, but I'd love to have him on the podcast. And by the way, just to make things clear, it's not an assistant coach with the Sacramento Kings. This coach has nothing to do with Sacramento. So don't start trying to figure out who it is. It's not here in Sacramento, which made it even more exciting that a coach outside of Sacramento was saying these things about DeMar DeRozan. And this coach is relatively familiar with DeMar DeRozan's game, I would say. So I really enjoyed that conversation. I'm glad I was able to share some of it with you, and I would love to hear your thoughts and your excitement level on it now that you've heard it. I'm going to have more conversations with more guests. I'm going to have some guys from Chicago, some friends of mine from Chicago who are going to join me on the Locked On Kings podcast in the future to talk about DeMar DeRozan more. We're trying to count down the days till training camp, right? Kings Summer League is now over. We're in that dead part. August sucks for NBA, but we'll get through it together. We'll get to September. Training camps will start. We can start yelling at each other about if Malik Monk should start or not, and we'll see how everything starts to play out and take shape. I can't wait. Thank you so much for your support here of the Locked On Kings podcast as always. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.